Sales outsourcing, best practices for savings. Why sales outsourcing is a savings play when you do it right. Building a high-performing SDR function is expensive, time-consuming, and operationally fragile, especially when you're trying to scale outbound in 2025. That's why sales outsourcing has shifted from a cost-cutting tactic to a practical way to create pipeline faster while lowering risk. The goal isn't simply to hire cheaper cold callers. It's to reduce your cost per qualified opportunity without sacrificing brand, targeting, or conversion. In most B2B orgs, the real problem isn't whether an outsourced sales team can book meetings. It's whether those meetings turn into pipeline and revenue at a better unit cost than your in-house motion. That's why we treat outsourcing like an extension of your go-to-market system, not a vendor swap. When the model is set up correctly, teams commonly see 30 to 60% lower outbound costs compared to building internally, largely by removing hiring, benefits, and tooling overhead while accelerating time to pipeline. This guide breaks down the economics, the operating model, and the contract structure that actually protects savings. We'll also cover the most common traps, like paying for activity instead of outcomes, or chasing the cheapest cold calling agency, and how to avoid them. If you want predictable pipeline without the headcount burden, this is the framework to follow. Benchmark the true cost of an in-house SDR seat. Savings are impossible to measure until you model your real in-house total cost of ownership. A productive in-house SDR often costs $9.7K to $14.4K per month once you include compensation, benefits, tools, management time, and operational support, not just base salary. That number is the baseline you should compare against when an SDR agency or outbound sales agency quotes a monthly retainer. Then layer in the vacancy tax that most teams ignore, ramp time plus churn. SDR attrition averages roughly 40% annually, which means you repeatedly pay recruiting and onboarding costs while productivity resets. Even if your process is strong, you're still absorbing the compounding effect of lost months, underfilled territory coverage, and manager bandwidth spent on constant rebuilding. At the team level, the numbers add up quickly. A small internal pod, for example, 2 SDRs and a manager, commonly lands around $300 to $400K per year after salary, tech, training, and the hidden expenses that don't show up on a single line item. If you're comparing outsourcing to a single SDR salary, you're undercounting what you're actually spending. Where outsourced SDR programs actually save money. The cleanest savings from sales outsourcing come from collapsing multiple line items into one predictable fee. A strong sales development agency bundles labor, management, training, data, sequencing infrastructure, and reporting, costs you'd otherwise carry across recruiters, enablement, tools, and leadership overhead. In many cases, outsourcing can remove 60 to 70% of the overhead layer that sits on top of a rep's salary. Speed is the second lever, and it often matters more than the monthly invoice. Outsourced programs can typically launch in 2 to 4 weeks, while standing up an internal SDR function commonly takes 3 to 6 months to hire, onboard, and fully ramp. Faster start means faster learning, faster messaging iteration, and earlier pipeline creation, which lowers your effective CAC over time. Finally, outsourcing shifts churn and coverage risk. When attrition hits, your provider owns backfill and continuity, so your pipeline doesn't stall every time a rep leaves. The key is choosing a partner that can deliver quality across channels: cold email agency execution, B2B cold calling services, and list building services without sacrificing targeting discipline. Start with unit economics, not headcount. Before you compare vendors, build a simple unit economics model that forces clarity. Cost per meeting, cost per opportunity, and cost per dollar of pipeline. Use your real ICP, your historical meeting-to-opportunity conversion rate, and your sales cycle assumptions. This prevents a common mistake, optimizing for cheaper meetings that never convert. Then compare apples to apples across pricing models. Retainers can be predictable, pay-per-appointment lead generation can look attractive, and hybrids can align incentives if qualification is defined tightly. No matter how you buy, the win condition is the same: lower cost per qualified opportunity at the same or better downstream conversion. We also see hybrid org designs de-risk expansion. Keep a small in-house SDR core for strategic accounts, and use an outsourced sales team to test new segments, regions, or products. That structure lets you hire SDRs without locking in long-term headcount, while still protecting brand and messaging control. It's one of the fastest paths to scaling outbound without rebuilding your org chart every quarter. The biggest savings in outsourcing don't come from cheaper labor. They come from faster learning, tighter accountability, and a lower cost per qualified opportunity. Structure contracts and SLAs around outcomes. The most expensive outsourcing mistake is paying for activity instead of business impact. Dials, emails, and hours worked are inputs. They don't protect your ROI when quality drops. This is why outcome-based outsourcing keeps growing. Recent survey insights show 67% of organizations prioritize business outcomes over pure cost savings, while only 34% cite cost reduction as the primary driver. Your contract should define what qualified means in writing, using your ICP and buying committee reality. Bake in meeting acceptance criteria, show rate expectations, and replacement policies for no-shows or off-ICP bookings. If you're using a pay-per-meeting lead generation model, these definitions are non-negotiable. Otherwise, incentives drift toward volume. Just as important, require operational transparency. Your outsourced SDR work should live in your CRM, with standardized fields, notes, and handoff steps to AEs, so marketing and sales can learn from what's working. When reporting stays inside a vendor portal, you lose feedback speed, and the whole point of outsourcing is faster iteration at a better unit cost. Protect savings with governance and brand control. Outsourcing only saves money if you run it like a real revenue function. We recommend a simple operating cadence: weekly tactical reviews, lists, messaging, objections, show rates; monthly performance readouts, meetings, op creation, pipeline; and quarterly business reviews tied to ICP fit and ACV. This cadence is the difference between a scalable outbound engine and a calendar-filling vendor relationship. Quality control is also where many teams fail by outsourcing strategy instead of execution. Your company must own ICP, positioning, and qualification standards. The provider should execute, experiment, and optimize within that frame. If you hand off your narrative to a cheap provider, you'll often get generic sequences, spammy tactics, and meetings that waste AE time, making your real CAC worse, not better. Finally, don't ignore cultural and time zone alignment. If most of your buyers are in North America, a cold calling team needs the language nuance and coordination rhythm to match, or no-shows and low trust will erase savings. The best cold calling companies will prove competence with sample calls, QA workflows, and coaching, not just a low hourly rate. Optimize the motion, enablement, multi-channel, and list quality. An outsourced SDR team will only be as effective as the context you give them. Treat them like an extension of your sales org. Share win-loss insights, objection handling, competitive talk tracks, and examples of high-converting emails and call openings. When you invest in enablement upfront, you get higher conversion rates, fewer unqualified meetings, and more leverage from your spend. Multi-channel execution is where a strong B2B sales agency separates itself from commodity vendors. The most reliable programs combine cold call services with a cold email agency approach and light LinkedIn outreach services, coordinated around a single narrative and consistent qualification. This is also how you reduce dependency on any one channel as deliverability and response patterns shift. List quality is the unglamorous driver of ROI, and it's where cheapest provider decisions implode. Strong B2B list building services focus on verified contacts, accurate firmographics, and clear exclusion rules that protect your brand and AE time. If your vendor can't explain their data sources, enrichment process, and how they prevent off-ICP bookings, you're not buying savings, you're buying downstream cleanup work. Next steps: pilot, prove the economics, then scale. The smartest way to outsource sales is to run a controlled pilot, prove unit economics, and then expand with confidence. Plan for 60 to 90 days with clear targets for qualified, show-up meetings and a documented path from meetings to opportunities in your CRM. The first few weeks should focus on list building, messaging tests, and calibration. The next stretch should generate enough volume to evaluate quality and conversion. Outsourcing is also becoming more mainstream for customer-facing work, not just back-office support. In Deloitte's 2024 survey, about 50% of executives reported outsourcing front-office capabilities like sales and marketing, which signals a broader shift toward flexible, outcome-driven revenue teams. Practically, this means you can design a GTM org that flexes capacity without constantly rehiring and re-ramping. At SalesHive, we've built our SDR outsourcing and outbound engine around those realities: predictable economics, fast launch, and tight governance. Our cold calling services, email outreach, and list building are designed to integrate into your systems so you can measure cost per opportunity, not just activity. If you approach outsourcing with disciplined modeling, outcome-based contracts, and a tight operating cadence, it becomes one of the cleanest levers for lowering CAC while growing revenue.